What's going on, guys? Pardon my incredibly obnoxious clickbait TMZ title. But yeah, so Annie Lederman is officially leaving Trash Tuesday. She went over it on her podcast, and Trash Tuesday is a podcast hosted by Annie Lederman, Kalila Kuhn, and Esther Pavitsky. They have lighthearted discussion about gossip and trending topics and have guest appearances. The podcast was reasonably successful, but had some negative attention around it between the Brendan Schaub debacle and the Kalila and Bobby divorce. So on her podcast, she went on record saying why she left, and she started off by opening up with a story on how she got into comedy and what her ultimate goal was. It was a very long and very genuine discussion she had. You could tell she was thinking about this for quite some time, and she's pretty serious about the decision. She ultimately said she wants to focus more on comedy. She is finding success from other avenues, video games and TV appearances she made examples of. And I guess those were sort of put by the wayside just because of all the podcast work she had to put in.
What was causing me the most was taking the most of my energy, and for me that was Trash Tuesday. So I know that there's so many fans that love the show, and I love the show, and I'm really proud of everything that we've created, but it's just like I I want to do my comedy special and I keep pushing it off because I just can't focus. And I'm really excited that I now have more time to focus on that and more time to focus on Annie Wood, and that I'm not, even though maybe you guys are just fans of me and you've liked everything I'm doing. For me, I feel like I've been showing up like half myself everywhere I'm going, and I just want to be able to really be present and like focused because I have worked so hard. This is my life's work. This is what I love to do, and I feel so grateful that I get to make a living doing this. And leaving Trash Tuesday is like was a very scary decision to come to because it is a large chunk of my income, but I have to like bet on myself and I have to trust my instincts and listen to my body.
She then talked about how she had a stress related cough, which, when you talk for a living like Brendan Schwab, having a cough that lingers extensively, obviously, that's not something you want to deal with. And then she also mentioned that she had a 3 hour commute for this podcast, which, I mean, is that the end of the world? Like, not really, but I actually have a pretty similar commute myself when I have to, and it's not fun. And I can say one thing for sure, I'm not joyful or cheerful when I get to where I'm going. You know, I'm pretty out of it. I'm pretty irritable, you know? So I can see where she's coming from on that. Having to commute and then being required to be funny and nice and all that. I get it. So that was why she said she left the podcast. Now I'll get into some other reasons that might have contributed to it, whether they were on a subconscious level or she just didn't want to say it. Or maybe not at all. Who knows? This is a commentary video where we can just speculate all day, right? So the drama situation, Kalila Kuhn has quite the tumultuous history. If you're watching this video, you're probably familiar with it, but I will go over it. Her and Bobby got divorced, yet they still run their podcast together, their podcast being Tiger Belly. And this situation, I mean, they got divorced, what, like a year ago or something? And to this day, it's still routinely talked about. Bobby has another podcast with Andrew Santino, and just recently they've gotten into it again. You know, I mean, it's a very trending topic. The other thing, and I don't want to talk about this one too much, but there was the whole dog situation. If you're curious, you can look that one up. I don't want to say too much on it because it's weird. And speaking of weird, she's also made strange jokes about cheating on Bobby while they were still married. And, you know, was it just a joke that didn't land correctly, or was there seriousness to it? It sounded weird. Like, it didn't sound like they were busting each other's balls. So something seemed off there. And ultimately, all this stuff about Kalila, it ultimately doesn't really matter. But sometimes what happens is when there's someone in this podcast sphere who becomes a pariah, that becomes an issue. And I'll give a couple examples. Chris D'Elia and Bryan Callen, ironically, both podcast co-hosts with Brendan Schwab in one form or another. But when you get that sort of negative attention around you, it's like other podcast hosts don't want you on because like how deep does that hole go? It's like when people don't know the whole story and they can't really trust you anymore, having you on the podcast, it's more of a liability, because it's like you don't want to be the person who's now associated with Chris D'Elia. And I get that. And obviously, Chris D'Elia and Kalila are on way different tiers of liability, obviously. But it's still a factor. Kalila has basically become the female Brendan Schaub, where I don't know if it's still as big as it was or is or whatever, but she had her own subreddit that was gaining some traction for a while there. And I don't know, it's like when that becomes a thing, it's like, well, now every time you're on a podcast with this person, you're now also under a microscope. And also, you don't really know where the end of that road goes because ultimately, these podcasters get paid through sponsors and advertising. And if the sponsors and advertising decide you're just not worth it anymore because of some liability issue, then that's a problem. And the problem is with the way this industry works, you don't know if that's going to happen ever. Like it might never happen. It might happen tomorrow. You don't know. And then it's just one more thing you have to think about. And when you just want to do stand-up comedy, it's like you just want to be funny. It's like that's all you want to care about, I imagine. So having to deal with any of that stuff on some level may have contributed to this whole situation. Okay, and speaking of Brendan Schaub and situations, that could be another factor here. So on Trash Tuesday, and this was probably a year ago or so, it was basically revealed by Annie that Brendan Schaub asked her to walk him to his Trugg, basically looking for favors of a special kind. And then there was, I mean, in this like comedy drama sphere, there was all sorts of, I mean, it was just craziness for however long it was. And then Brendan was on the Bobby and Kalila podcast. And then like Annie, I think they had to like retract some statements, but at that point it was already done. And like Brendan would talk about it, but it was pretty obvious that something happened. Like when Brendan would talk about it, it just seemed very not true when he would give his side of the story. So this is just like another thing that's connected to Kalila that she would have to, again, not directly deal with, but on a subconscious level, it is like a factor and a stressor in this whole situation. So, okay, so that was the video. So ultimately, what we do know is Annie's leaving the podcast. I do believe her in what she was saying. I mean, based on the situation, I definitely don't blame her, and it sounds like that's really what happened. It's like if you're going to be deceitful in why you're doing something, you wouldn't talk about it for 30 minutes and really be passionate about it. Like you have to be a really good liar to do something like that. And I don't know. I don't think she was lying. I think she was pretty honest with everything. But you never know what other things may be involved, which she didn't get into, just for personal reasons. You don't want to spread any more stuff than you have to. So I get it. So let me know what you guys think. Comment, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. And I will see you guys next time.